Have you ever stood in a room full of people who were supposed to celebrate you and felt completely invisible? Like everyone was smiling at you, but nobody was actually seeing you. Like the whole event was a performance, and you were the only one who didn't get the script. Have you ever looked at your own reflection and wondered when you stopped recognizing the woman staring back at you? When did she start shrinking? When did she learn to make herself small enough to fit inside someone else's idea of who she should be? When did she stop being the woman who built herself from nothing and start being the woman who was just grateful to be allowed in the room? Can you imagine standing in the bathroom of your own mansion, wearing a dress that cost more than your mother made in 6 months, gripping the edge of a marble sink so hard your knuckles ache, because if you let go, you might collapse, and if you collapse, you might never get back up? That's where Maya was. That's exactly where she was standing at 8:47 on a Saturday evening in October at her own 5th wedding anniversary party, while 200 guests mingled downstairs, drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than her childhood apartment cost per month. Maya couldn't move. Her feet were frozen to the heated tile floor. Her hands were trembling against the cold marble, and her eyes were fixed on her own reflection like she was trying to find something she lost a long time ago. Something that had used to live behind those eyes. Something that had been slowly suffocating for 5 years without her even noticing until tonight. Tonight, when she watched her husband greet her ex-fiancée at the front door of their home. Victoria Ashworth. The name alone made Maya's stomach clench. She'd heard that name so many times in the past 5 years, it had become a kind of ghost, a presence that was never fully in the room, but never fully gone either. Victoria at Christmas dinner, when Richard's mother would sigh and say, "What a shame it didn't work out." Victoria in the photograph Maya found in Richard's desk 3 years ago, hidden but not discarded, kept. Preserved, like a prayer he wasn't ready to stop praying. Victoria in the way Richard's friends looked at Maya sometimes, with that particular tilt of the head that said, "We're being polite, but we all know you're not really one of us." And now, Victoria was downstairs, in Maya's home, at Maya's anniversary party, wearing a dress that probably cost as much as Maya's, and carrying herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove you belong anywhere, because the world was built for women like her. Richard invited her. That was the part Maya still couldn't process. Her own husband had put Victoria's name on the guest list for their wedding anniversary celebration without telling Maya, without even pretending to consider how it might feel for Maya to watch the woman who almost married her husband walk through the front door like she owned the place. When Maya confronted him 2 days ago, his response was so dismissive it took her breath away. "She's an old friend. We've stayed in touch. It would be rude not to invite her." Like Maya was the unreasonable one. Like Maya was the problem. Like 5 years of marriage meant nothing compared to whatever Richard and Victoria still had between them. And the worst part? The part that was keeping Maya frozen in this bathroom while her anniversary party happened without her? She saw the way Richard looked at Victoria when she walked in. She saw his face change. She saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen directed at her in years, maybe ever. A softness, a warmth, a recognition that said, "You're home." Maya was his wife, but Victoria was his home. And everyone downstairs knew it. Maya could feel it in the way the energy shifted when Victoria entered, the way conversations paused, the way people glanced between Richard and Victoria and then at Maya with that particular expression of polite pity that rich people have perfected. Poor thing, she has no idea. Or maybe, poor thing, she knows and there's nothing she can do about it. But here's what none of them knew. Here's what Richard didn't know. Here's what Victoria, with her old money confidence and her perfect blonde hair and her country club membership since birth, could never imagine. Maya was not the woman they thought she was. She was not the girl from Baltimore who got lucky. She was not the charity case who should be grateful. She was not the trophy wife who married up and would leave with nothing when the man who elevated her decided she was no longer worth the trouble. Maya had been spending the last 5 years building something, quietly, secretly, independently. While they were all looking down on her, she was looking ahead. While they were whispering about how she didn't belong, she was constructing a future that didn't depend on any of them. While Richard was texting his ex-fiancée and planning God knows what, Maya was investing and growing and building a portfolio that would make every single person in that room choke on their champagne. She wasn't trapped. She was never trapped. She just hadn't decided to leave yet. But tonight, watching her husband's eyes light up for another woman at their anniversary party, feeling the weight of 5 years of disrespect pressing down on her shoulders, standing in this bathroom that cost more to renovate than her mother's entire house, tonight, Maya decided. She wasn't going to perform, done shrinking, done being the woman who smiled through insults and swallowed her pride and told herself that love meant endurance. Love didn't mean endurance. Love meant respect. And Richard had never respected her. Not really. She could see that now. The way you can suddenly see something that was always there once you stop pretending it isn't. She looked at her reflection one more time. The diamonds around her neck that Richard gave her on their 3rd anniversary, the dress his stylist picked out for her, the hair his preferred salon styled, the makeup his aesthetic expectations required. She looked like a woman who had been assembled by someone else, a doll dressed up for display, a prop in Richard's performance of the perfect life. But underneath it all, underneath the silk and the diamonds and the carefully applied mask, there was still Maya, the girl who watched her father walk out when she was 7 and didn't cry because she'd already learned that crying didn't bring people back. The teenager who worked 2 jobs while finishing high school because her mother couldn't do it alone. The woman who clawed her way into finance and earned a seat at tables where nobody wanted her and refused to leave until they had no choice to respect her. That Maya was still in there, buried, suffocated, but not dead. And tonight, that Maya was going to remind everyone in that room who they were really dealing with. She straightened her spine, adjusted her dress, checked her makeup one final time, and she made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to confront Richard in private and beg him to choose her. She wasn't going to compete with Victoria for the attention of a man who should have been competing for hers. She was going to teach her millionaire husband a lesson about value, about worth, about the difference between what money can buy and what it can never purchase. She was going to show everyone in that room that the woman they dismissed and pitied and whispered about was worth more than all of them. Not because of what she married into, because of what she built when no one was watching. And then she was going to walk out of that mansion with her head held high and never look back. But first, she needed to go downstairs. She needed to smile. She needed to play the part one last time, because the lesson she was about to deliver required an audience, and every single person at this party was about to witness something they would never forget. Maya took one final breath, pressed her palms flat against the marble, and whispered to her reflection 5 words that her mother used to say when the world was falling apart and there was nothing to do but keep moving forward. "You've survived worse than this." She had. She would, again. She turned off the bathroom light, opened the door, and walked toward the stairs. The party was waiting. Victoria was waiting. Richard was waiting, and none of them had any idea what was coming. But Maya did, and for the first time in 5 years, she smiled. A real smile, not the performance smile she'd been wearing like a mask since the day she married into this world. A smile that said, "I see you, I see all of you, and you have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with." The lesson was about to begin. Maya Denise Carter was born in a two-bedroom apartment on the east side of Baltimore in the summer of 1989. The apartment had water stains on the ceiling that her mother Gloria tried to cover with posters. It had radiators that clanked so loud in the winter you could hear them 2 floors down. It had thin walls that let in every argument from the neighbors, and every siren from the street, and every sound of a city that never seemed to sleep no matter how tired its people were. But it also had love, at least in the beginning. Maya's father was a man named Jerome Carter, handsome, charming, the kind of man who walked into a room and made every woman look twice, and every man stand up a little straighter. He had a laugh that filled the whole apartment, and hands that could fix anything, and a way of looking at Maya's mother that made Gloria feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Maya remembered fragments of those early years, sitting on her father's shoulders at the harbor watching boats come in, dancing in the living room while Gloria cooked dinner and Jerome played records on a turntable he'd bought from a pawn shop, the smell of his cologne when he kissed her goodnight. Old Spice. She couldn't smell Old Spice without her chest tightening. But the good memories were outnumbered by one very bad one. One memory that lived inside Maya like a splinter that never worked its way out, no matter how many years passed. She was 7 years old. It was a Tuesday morning in March. The radiators were clanking. Gloria was already at work. She'd left before sunrise, like she always did. Maya was eating cereal at the kitchen table. Frosted Flakes. She remembered that detail because she was counting the flakes in her bowl, like kids do when they're bored and waiting for something to happen. Jerome came out of the bedroom, carrying a duffel bag. Maya looked up, asked him where he was going. He said he had to run an errand. He'd be back soon. He walked over and kissed the top of her head. His lips were dry. His hand was shaking slightly when he touched her hair. She didn't understand what any of that meant at the time. She was 7. She thought errand meant he was going to the store. He walked to the front door, opened it, and then he turned around and looked at her one last time. And something in his eyes, something Maya wouldn't have the language to describe until she was much older, something that looked like guilt and fear and relief all tangled together. He said, "Be good for your mama, baby." And then he walked out. Maya finished her cereal, watched cartoons, waited for him to come back from his errand. She waited all day, she waited all week, she waited for months. Every time she heard footsteps in the hallway, her heart would jump. Every time the phone rang, she'd hold her breath. Every time there was a knock at the door, she'd run to open it, hoping it would be him. It never was. Jerome Carter didn't die. He didn't go to prison, he didn't get deployed overseas or kidnapped, or any of the dramatic explanations Maya invented in her head to make sense of his absence. He just left. Walked out on a Tuesday morning with a duffel bag and 4 words and never looked back. Gloria tried to explain it to Maya, tried to make it make sense. But there's no way to explain to a 7-year-old why her father chose to disappear. There's no gentle version of that story. There's no framing that makes it hurt less. So Gloria stopped trying to explain and started trying to survive. She worked 2 jobs, 3 during the summers when Maya was out of school and needed to be supervised, nursing aide at a hospital during the day, cleaning offices downtown at night. Her feet swelled from standing for 16 hours. Her back ached so constantly that she stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a sound that never stops. She gave everything she had to keep Maya fed and clothed and housed in that apartment with the water stains and the clanking radiators. And the only thing she asked in return was that Maya not end up like her. "You're going to be something, baby," Gloria would say. "You're going to have choices, options. You're not going to depend on any man for nothing, you hear me? Nothing." Maya heard her. She heard her every single day. And somewhere deep inside her small chest, a fire ignited. Not the warm kind of fire that keeps you comfortable, the other kind. The kind that burns everything in its path. The kind that refuses to go out no matter how much water the world pours on it. She became obsessed with not being poor, not because she was ashamed of where she came from, but because she understood what poverty really meant. It meant her mother crying at the kitchen table because the electricity bill was due and the paycheck was short. It meant eating cereal for 3 nights a week because real food cost money they didn't have. It meant watching her mother's body break down year after year from work that paid just enough to keep them alive, but never enough to let them rest. Poverty wasn't just about money. It was about options, and Maya was going to have options, no matter what it took. She worked in school like other kids played sports, with intensity, with obsession, with the single-minded focus of someone who understood that the scoreboard was her grades and the prize was a way out. She graduated high school with a 4.1 GPA. She worked 2 jobs during the summers, one at a grocery store bagging groceries, and one at a dry cleaner pressing shirts. Every dollar she earned went into a savings account she never touched. She got scholarships. Not enough to cover everything, but enough to make college possible. She went to the University of Maryland, studied finance, not because she loved numbers, but because she understood that money was the language the world listened to. If you wanted to be heard, you needed to speak fluent money. She graduated, got a job at an investment firm in Baltimore, started at the bottom, made copies, fetched coffee, sat in meetings where men twice her age talked over her like she wasn't even in the room. She watched, she learned, she kept her mouth shut and her eyes open, and she studied the way power moved in those rooms, who had it, who wanted it, how it was gained and lost and traded. By 28, she was making 6 figures. She had an apartment of her own, a car that started every time she turned the key, a savings account that would have made her 7-year-old self gasp. She wasn't rich, but she was stable, independent, in control of her own life for the first time ever. And then she met Richard. It was at a client dinner. Richard Kensington III, founder of Kensington Capital, old money that had been multiplied by new ambition. He was 42, divorced once, no children, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone in the room already knew it. Maya wasn't impressed by his money. She'd spent her whole career around money. What caught her attention was the way he looked at her, not through her, at her, like she was the only person in a room full of executives trying to get his attention. He asked her about her work, her background, her opinions on the market. He listened when she talked. He asked follow-up questions. He treated her like a professional, not a decoration. When the dinner ended, he asked for her number. She almost didn't give it to him. Men like Richard didn't date women like Maya. That's what she told herself. Men like Richard dated women named Victoria, women with legacy surnames and trust funds and summer homes in the Hamptons, not women from Baltimore with student loan debt and a mother who still worked part-time because she didn't know how to sit still. But something in his eyes made her reconsider. Something that looked almost like loneliness, like recognition. Like he saw something in her that she didn't even know was visible. She gave him her number. He called the next day. They dated for a year. He took her to restaurants she'd only read about. He introduced her to a world she'd only seen in magazines. But he never made her feel small, at least in the beginning. He told her about his broken engagement to Victoria, how she wanted his name more than she wanted him, how he was tired of being seen as a bank account, how he wanted someone who would love him even if he lost everything. Maya believed him. She wanted to believe him, because the alternative was believing that she was just another acquisition, another asset, another thing Richard was collecting. When he proposed after 14 months, she said yes. When his mother looked at her with barely concealed disgust at the engagement dinner, she smiled through it, even though it felt like a knife. She told herself it was worth it. She told herself love required sacrifice. She told herself that once they were married, things would change. Richard's family would accept her. His world would make room for her. She just needed to prove herself, just needed to show them she belonged. The wedding was beautiful. 200 guests, most of them Richards. Maya's side had Gloria and a few cousins and some friends from college who looked as out of place as Maya felt. But none of that mattered when Richard took her hands at the altar and said his vows. None of it mattered when he slid the ring on her finger. None of it mattered when he kissed her and everyone applauded. And Maya thought, this is it. This is the life I built. This is the reward for all those years of fighting. But here's what Maya didn't know on her wedding day. The moment she signed that marriage certificate, she stopped being Maya Carter. She became Mrs. Richard Kensington. And in Richard's world, that title came with expectations, rules, a script she was supposed to follow without ever being given a copy. She was supposed to be grateful. She was supposed to be decorative. She was supposed to smile at dinners and nod at opinions and never outshine the man whose last name she now carried. And for 5 years, Maya tried to follow that script. 5 years of shrinking.
5 years of swallowing words she should have spoken. 5 years of watching herself disappear into a role that was never designed for a woman like her. But the fire her mother lit inside her when she was 7 years old never went out. It just went underground, burning quietly, waiting, building heat. And tonight, at this anniversary party, with Victoria downstairs and Richard pretending everything was fine, that fire was finally ready to break the surface. Because Maya didn't just survive those 5 years, she used them. And what she built in the shadows was about to step into the light. The first year of marriage was everything Maya hoped it would be. Richard was attentive, present. He held her hand at dinner parties and introduced her as my brilliant wife, and looked at her across crowded rooms with an expression that made her feel like the only woman on earth. They traveled. Paris for their honeymoon, Tokyo for his business trip where he extended the stay just so they could explore together, a private villa in Bali where they spent a week doing nothing but swimming and sleeping and making love like two people who had found something rare and intended to protect it. Maya let herself believe she had won. Not against Victoria specifically, but against the narrative she'd been fighting her entire life. The narrative that said women like her don't get happy endings. Women like her get used up and discarded. Women like her should be grateful for crumbs because they'll never get the whole meal. But here she was, living in a mansion, married to a man who seemed to adore her, wearing clothes that cost more than her childhood apartment's monthly rent. She had beaten the odds. She had rewritten her story. At least, that's what she told herself. The cracks started in year 2. Small ones. So small, Maya almost convinced herself she was imagining them. Richard started working later. Not dramatically later, just an extra hour here, 2 hours there. He'd call and say, "Don't wait up, I have a meeting," and Maya would eat dinner alone in a dining room built for 12, feeling like a guest in her own home. She told herself it was temporary. He was building an empire. Empires require sacrifice. She wasn't going to be the nagging wife who complained about her husband's ambition. She knew what ambition looked like. She respected it. But then the meetings started happening on weekends, too. Saturday mornings when they used to have breakfast together, Richard would disappear to the office and come home in the late afternoon smelling like a restaurant instead of a boardroom. Sunday evenings when Maya suggested they watch a movie, he'd claim he had calls to make and shut himself in his study for hours. The time they spent together shrank, slowly, week by week, until Maya realized she couldn't remember the last time they had a real conversation that wasn't about schedules or logistics or which event they needed to attend next. She tried to talk to him about it, once, carefully, the way you approach a wounded animal you're not sure will bite. She said she missed him, said she felt like they were becoming roommates instead of partners, said she wanted to reconnect. Richard looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Annoyed, like she'd interrupted something more important than his marriage. He said, "Maya, I'm building a future for us. Can you appreciate that instead of complaining about it?" Complaining. That word hit her like a slap. She wasn't complaining. She was expressing a need. But in Richard's world, those two things were apparently the same when they came from his wife's mouth. She didn't bring it up again. She swallowed the loneliness like she'd swallowed so many things since she was 7 years old, sitting at a kitchen table, waiting for a father who was never coming back. She smiled.
She adapted. She made herself smaller so Richard could take up more space. Year 3 brought the photograph. Maya wasn't snooping. That's what she told herself later when she tried to make sense of what she found. She was looking for a stapler in Richard's home office. His desk had drawers, and one of those drawers was slightly open, and inside that drawer, underneath some old contracts and business cards, was a photograph. Victoria and Richard. Years ago, maybe 8 years based on how young Richard looked. They were at some kind of gala, Victoria in a red dress, Richard in a tuxedo, her head tilted against his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist, both of them smiling with the easy confidence of people who belonged together, who expected to spend the rest of their lives together, who had no idea that some woman named Maya from Baltimore would eventually come between them. Maya stared at that photograph for a long time. Long enough for the image to burn itself into her memory, long enough to memorize every detail, the way Victoria's hand rested on Richard's chest, the way his fingers pressed into her hip, the way they fit together like two pieces of the same puzzle. She confronted Richard that night, kept her voice calm, asked him why he still had a picture of his ex-fiancée hidden in his desk. His response was immediate and dismissive. "It's just an old photograph, Maya. I forgot it was even there. It means nothing." But he didn't throw it away. That's what Maya noticed. He didn't walk over to the desk and tear it up or toss it in the trash. He just told her it meant nothing and expected her to believe him. And because she wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than confronting what it might mean if he was lying, she let it go. But she didn't forget. She couldn't forget. The image of Victoria's head on Richard's shoulder lived in her mind like a splinter, present, irritating, impossible to ignore, no matter how hard she tried. Year 4 was when Richard's family stopped pretending. Christmas dinner at Eleanor's estate, a 20,000 square foot monument to old money and older judgment. Maya had attended 4 of these dinners now. 4 years of sitting at a table surrounded by people who smiled at her face and whispered behind their back. 4 years of being asked where she came from, like she'd emerged from a swamp instead of a working-class neighborhood. 4 years of watching Eleanor look at Maya like an expression that suggested Maya was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of an expensive shoe. But this Christmas was different. This Christmas, Eleanor dropped the pretense entirely. They were discussing Richard's college years. Someone mentioned a reunion, and Eleanor said with perfect casual cruelty, "Oh, Richard, you should go. Maybe Victoria will be there. Such a shame that didn't work out. You two were so perfect together." The table went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, complicit quiet. The quiet of people who agreed with what had just been said and were waiting to see how Maya would react. Maya looked at Richard, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for the man who had promised to love and honor her to actually do it. Richard said nothing. He took a sip of his wine, changed the subject, moved on like his mother hadn't just told his wife to her face that she was a downgrade from the previous model. Maya smiled through the rest of dinner, laughed at the right moments, complimented the food, played the role she'd been playing for 4 years. But something inside her shifted that night. Something fundamental. The part of her that still believed Richard would eventually choose her the way he promised to on their wedding day went quiet. It didn't die exactly, it just stopped hoping. The phone calls started 6 months later, year 5. Late at night, after Maya had gone to bed, she'd hear Richard's phone buzz and he'd get up quietly and walk out of the bedroom and close the door behind him. I'd lie in the dark listening to the muffled sound of his voice through the walls, low, soft, the voice he used to use with her in the early days when they'd stay up to 3 in the morning talking about everything and nothing. When she asked who he was talking to, he always said work, international clients, time zone differences, deals that couldn't wait until morning. But these calls didn't sound like work. These calls sounded like something else. The soft laugh Richard gave when something amused him, the long pauses where he was clearly listening to someone talk, the way he'd pace by the window looking out at the night sky with his phone pressed to his ear like he was having a conversation he didn't want to end. Maya never confronted him about the calls, because by that point, she'd learned that confronting Richard didn't lead to answers, it led to deflection, to accusations that she was paranoid or insecure or ungrateful. It led to arguments where somehow Maya always ended up apologizing for having feelings. So, instead of confronting, she started preparing. It began small. A personal checking account Richard didn't know about. She transferred small amounts from the household budget, nothing noticeable. 100 here, 200 there, grocery money that she saved by cooking simpler meals, personal shopping allowances she didn't spend. Drip by drip, she built a reserve that existed outside of Richard's knowledge. Then she started investing. Quietly, using skills she developed years ago before she became Mrs. Kensington, before she forgot that she used to be someone. She researched opportunities, identified undervalued assets, made calculated bets with the money she'd saved. She didn't tell Richard because she told herself it wasn't about trust, it was about independence, it was about having options. But the truth was simpler and darker. She was preparing for the door to open and someone to walk out, the way her father did, the way men always did, eventually. She was building a parachute because she'd spent enough time at this altitude to know that the fall was coming. She just didn't know when. By the time their 5th anniversary approached, Maya's secret portfolio had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. Smart investments, a silent partnership in a tech startup one of her old colleagues had founded, real estate holdings in her maiden name, $4.2 million built entirely on her own, without Richard's knowledge, without anyone's help. She wasn't the woman they all thought she was. She was never the woman they all thought she was. And the only reason she hadn't revealed it yet was because she hadn't decided what she wanted to do with it. Stay and fight for a marriage that was slowly killing her, or leave and prove to everyone who ever doubted her that she didn't need Richard Kensington, or his family, or his money, or his world. She was still deciding when Richard announced he was throwing her an anniversary party. 200 guests, the biggest event of the season, a celebration of their marriage. And 3 weeks before the party, Maya discovered the guest list sitting on his desk. And there was a name on that list that made her decision for her. Victoria Ashworth, the woman Richard still kept a photograph of, the woman his mother wished he'd married instead, the woman on the other end of those late-night calls Maya had been pretending not to hear, coming to their anniversary party, invited by Richard, without Maya's knowledge or consent. And suddenly, the $4.2 million in her secret portfolio stopped being a safety net. It became a weapon. Maya found the guest list on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the party. Richard was at work. The house was empty except for the cleaning staff, who came every other day and moved through the rooms like ghosts, trying not to disturb anything. Maya had learned to ignore them, the way she'd learned to ignore so many things about this life. The way silence echoed in rooms too big for 2 people. The way her footsteps sounded on marble floors that never felt like home. The way she could walk through her own house and feel like a visitor who'd overstayed her welcome. She wasn't looking for the guest list. That's the thing. She was looking for a pen. Richard's office had a drawer full of expensive pens he never used. Mont Blanc, Cartier, gifts from clients and colleagues that accumulated like trophies nobody wanted. Maya needed to sign some documents for her secret investment account, and she didn't want to use the cheap ballpoint from the kitchen because some part of her still cared about presentation, even when no one was watching. The guest list was sitting right there on his desk, printed out. 3 pages, 200 names organized alphabetically with dietary restrictions and +1s noted in a column on the right. Richard was thorough about everything. Events, investments, the systematic dismantling of his wife's dignity, all executed with the same meticulous attention to detail. Maya picked up the list casually, not because she suspected anything, because she was curious, because this was supposed to be her party too, and she'd been told almost nothing about it. Richard wanted it to be a surprise, he said. He wanted her to just show up and enjoy herself, he said. He wanted to handle everything so she didn't have to stress. At the time, Maya thought it was romantic. Looking back, she realized it was strategic. He didn't want her involved because involvement meant oversight, and oversight meant she might notice something he didn't want her to see. Like Victoria Ashworth's name printed in 12-point font on page 2. Maya's eyes passed over it so quickly she almost missed it. Her brain was scanning for names she recognized, colleagues of Richard's, society couples they socialized with, the usual roster of wealthy strangers who attended events like this to see and be seen. But then her eye caught on that name and her whole body went cold. Ashworth, Victoria. No +1 noted. Dietary restriction, vegetarian. Maya stared at those 3 lines until the letters stopped making sense, until they blurred and reformed and blurred again, until she had to put the paper down because her hands were shaking so badly the pages rattled. She walked to the window, looked out at the grounds, the perfectly manicured lawn, the fountain that cost more than her mother's house, the oak trees that had been there for 100 years, watching generations of Kensingtons live and die and pass this estate down like a crown. Everything about this property screamed permanence, legacy, belonging, and Maya had never felt more like she didn't belong here than in this moment. Victoria was coming to their anniversary party, the event that was supposed to celebrate 5 years of marriage, 5 years of Maya trying to fit into a world that rejected her at every turn, 5 years of shrinking and smiling and pretending she didn't hear the whispers or see the looks or feel the constant low-grade humiliation of being treated like an imposter in her own life. And Richard had invited his ex-fiancée. Without asking Maya, without telling Maya, without even considering how it might feel for Maya to walk into a room full of people who already doubted her marriage and see the woman everyone wished Richard had married instead, standing there in a designer dress, sipping champagne like she owned the place. Because maybe, in some way, Maya had always owned this place, this life, this man. Maybe Maya never was the wife. Maybe she'd always been the placeholder, the intermission, the distraction Richard entertained while waiting for the real show to resume. Maya left the office, walked down the hallway, past the portrait gallery where paintings of Kensington ancestors stared down at her with the same expression Richard's mother had at every family dinner. Judgment, disapproval, the silent question of, "What are you doing here?" She found herself in the kitchen, poured a glass of water, drank it slowly, set the glass down on the counter, and noticed her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator door. Distorted, unclear, a woman she barely recognized looking back at her. Who was she now, after 5 years of marriage to a man who apparently still kept his ex-fiancée close enough to invite to intimate celebrations? After 5 years of proving herself to people who had decided she was worthless before she ever opened her mouth? After 5 years of building a secret portfolio because some part of her always knew this wasn't real, that the fairy tale had an expiration date, that the glass slipper was going to shatter eventually. She didn't cry. That surprised her. She expected tears, expected the grief to come pouring out the way it had so many times before when Richard's world reminded her that she wasn't welcome in it. But her eyes stayed dry. Her breathing stayed steady, and somewhere, deep in her chest, something shifted. Something that had been holding on loosened its grip and let go. She wasn't sad. She was done. There's a difference. Sadness is wanting things to be different. Done is accepting that they won't be. Sadness is fighting for something you believe you can save. Done is realizing it was never yours to save in the first place. Maya was done. But she wasn't going to slink away quietly. She wasn't going to disappear in the middle of the night and leave Richard's world intact. She wasn't going to be the tragic figure everyone pitied. Poor Maya. She tried so hard. She just wasn't right for him. Better luck next time. No. If Maya was leaving this marriage, she was leaving it on her terms, with every person who ever doubted her watching as she proved them all wrong. She waited for Richard to come home that night, made dinner, set the table, lit candles, the whole performance. When he walked through the door at 8:15, smelling faintly of whiskey and someone else's perfume, she smiled and kissed his cheek and asked about his day. They ate. He talked about work, about the markets, about some deal he was structuring that would make him even richer than he already was. Maya nodded at the right moments, asked follow-up questions, played the role of the interested wife while a different conversation assembled itself in her mind. When they finished eating, she poured him another glass of wine and sat back in her chair and said with perfect casual innocence, "I saw the guest list for the party today." Richard's fork paused halfway to his mouth, a micro hesitation, barely perceptible, but Maya had spent 5 years studying this man. She knew every tell, every flicker, every slight shift in his body language that indicated he was about to lie. "Oh?" he said. "I thought I put that away." "It was on your desk. I was looking for a pen." He nodded, resumed eating. "What did you think? Good crowd, right? Everyone who matters will be there." Everyone who matters. Maya turned that phrase over in her mind. Everyone who matters. Did she matter? Had she ever? "I noticed Victoria's name on the list." Richard set his fork down, picked up his wine glass, took a long, slow sip, the deliberate pace of a man buying time to construct his defense. "Victoria and I have stayed in touch," he said. "She's part of my social circle. It would be awkward to exclude her." "From our anniversary party." "From any major event, people would talk." "People are already going to talk, Richard. They're going to talk about why your ex-fiancée is at your 5th anniversary celebration." He sighed. That particular sigh he used when Maya said something he considered beneath him. The sigh that made her feel like a child throwing a tantrum instead of a wife expressing a legitimate concern. "You're being insecure," he said, "and honestly, it's not attractive. Victoria is coming. That's final. If you can't handle being in the same room as a woman I dated 8 years ago, then maybe you should work on your confidence issues instead of trying to control my guest list." Control his guest list, like she was the unreasonable one, like she was the problem, like asking your husband not to invite his ex-fiancée to your anniversary party was some kind of outrageous demand. Maya opened her mouth to respond, but Richard stood up before she could. He carried his plate to the sink, set it down with a clatter that echoed in the massive kitchen, and then he walked past her without looking at her and said, "I have calls to make. Don't wait up." She sat at the table alone, surrounded by the remnants of a dinner she'd cooked for a man who just dismissed her like a servant who'd spoken out of turn. The candles she'd lit still flickered, the wine she'd poured still sat untouched in her glass, the silence of the house pressed in on her from all sides. "I married you, didn't I?" Those 4 words bounced around her skull, 4 words that revealed everything Maya had suspected for years, but hadn't wanted to see. Richard didn't marry her because she loved her. He married her because she was different from Victoria, because she was a choice that proved something to himself, a rebellion against his world, a statement that he wasn't like his mother or his friends or all the other people who expected him to marry someone from the right family with the right name and the right pedigree. But statements expire. Rebellions end, and the thing about marrying someone to prove a point is that eventually you resent them for being the point you had to prove. Richard resented Maya. Maybe he always had, and now Victoria was coming back, and suddenly Maya's purpose in his life was complete. The statement had been made. The rebellion was over. It was time to return to regularly scheduled programming. Maya picked up her wine glass, took a long sip, let the warmth spread through her chest. Fine, Victoria could come. Richard could have his little reunion. His mother could smile and say what a shame it was that things didn't work out the first time. His friends could whisper about poor Maya, who never really fit in anyway. Let them. Because none of them knew what Maya knew. None of them understood what she'd been building in the shadows while they were all busy underestimating her. None of them had any idea that the woman they dismissed as a charity case was worth more than most of them combined. Richard thought this party was going to be a celebration of their marriage. He was wrong. It was going to be a funeral, and Maya was going to make sure he was the one they buried. She finished her wine, washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and went to bed in the room she shared with a man who was probably downstairs on the phone with the woman he wished he'd married instead. But Maya didn't cry. She didn't toss and turn. She closed her eyes and slept more peacefully than she had in years. Because now she had a plan, and Richard had no idea it was coming. The night before the party, Maya did something she never thought she'd do. Something she judged other women for doing. Something she always told herself was beneath her, because trust was the foundation of a marriage, and if you had to check your husband's phone, you'd already lost. But Maya wasn't worried about losing anymore. She'd already lost. She just needed to know exactly how much. Richard had fallen asleep early, unusual for him. He'd been stressed about the party preparations, arguing with caterers, micromanaging the event coordinator, making sure every detail was perfect for the 200 guests who would fill their home tomorrow night to celebrate a marriage that was already dead. He'd taken a sleeping pill around 10 and passed out before 11. Maya watched him drift off from across the bedroom, watched his breathing slow, watched his hand go slack against the pillow, watched the man she'd given 5 years of her life to sleep peacefully while she lay awake calculating the exact measurements of his betrayal. She waited until midnight. Then she waited another hour just to be safe. At 1 a.m, she slipped out of bed slowly, carefully, the way you move when you're doing something you can never take back. She picked up Richard's phone from his nightstand. The screen lit up when she touched it. She held her breath, waited for him to stir. He didn't. She carried the phone to the bathroom, closed the door, locked it, sat down on the edge of the cold marble tub and stared at the device in her hands. Richard's password was predictable. His mother's birthday, 0417. Maya had figured that out years ago by watching his fingers move across the screen. She never used the information because she never wanted to know what she might find. But tonight was different. Tonight, she needed ammunition. The phone unlocked. Maya's heart was pounding so loud she could hear it echoing off the bathroom's walls. Her fingers trembled as she navigated to his messages. The screen was too bright, the bathroom was too quiet. Every second felt stretched and distorted, like time itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would find. She found it immediately. A text thread with Victoria. Not hidden, not buried, right there at the top of his recent messages, like Richard wasn't even trying to hide it anymore, like he was so confident in Maya's ignorance that he didn't bother with precautions. Maya started scrolling. The messages went back 8 months. 8 months, more than half a year of conversations happening while Maya slept in his bed and cooked his meals and played the role of his wife. The timestamps told their own story. Late-night messages at 1 and 2 in the morning, midday exchanges while Maya was probably in the same house, assuming he was working, and weekend conversations during the hours he claimed to be at the office. She read everything. The tone of the messages made her stomach turn. This wasn't professional. This wasn't friendly. This was intimate in a way that felt like watching a movie of your own replacement being filmed in real time. Victoria called him baby. Richard called her V with a heart emoji. They referenced inside jokes Maya didn't understand. They reminisced about trips they'd taken years ago. They talked about restaurants they wanted to try and places they wanted to visit and a future they were apparently planning together. And they talked about Maya. Maya scrolled past message after message looking for her own name. It appeared more often than she expected. Always in the same context, always with the same tone. Victoria wrote, "She doesn't deserve you. She never did. A woman like that marrying into your family? It's embarrassing for everyone." Richard's response, "I know. I've known for a while, but getting out is complicated." Victoria wrote, The prenup protects you, right? You're not going to lose anything. Richard's response, my lawyers made sure of it. She'll get the minimum, enough to not cause a scene, not enough to matter. Not enough to matter. Maya read that line 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Each time it cut a little deeper, not enough to matter, like she was a line item on a budget, an expense to be minimized, a problem to be managed, rather than a person who had given him 5 years of her life. She kept scrolling, kept reading, kept gathering evidence of her own erasure. Victoria wrote 2 days ago, after the party, we should talk about us, about the future. Richard's response, I'm ready. I just need to handle things with Maya first. The prenup is complicated, but my lawyers are confident. By the end of the summer, this will all be over. By the end of the summer. So this was the timeline. The anniversary party wasn't a celebration, it was a transition, a public event where Richard could reintroduce Victoria to his world, a way to prepare everyone for the announcement that would come in the following months. Richard was going to divorce Maya and go back to Victoria, and by the end of the summer, Maya would be erased from his life like she never existed. And he thought he didn't know. He thought she was still the naive girl from Baltimore who should be grateful for the opportunity to exist in his world. He thought she would accept whatever crumbs he threw her and disappear quietly when he was done with her. He had no idea. Maya kept scrolling. The messages got worse, more recent, more specific. Richard complaining about Maya's insecurity, Victoria reassuring him that it was almost over. The two of them discussing the anniversary party like it was a formality, a final performance before the curtain came down. And then Maya found the message that made her stop breathing entirely. It was from yesterday, sent while Maya was in the kitchen making dinner, while she was lighting candles and setting the table and trying to have a conversation with her husband about basic respect. Richard had texted Victoria. She confronted me about the guest list, asked why you were coming. I handled it, told her she was being insecure. She backed off like she always does. One more night of pretending and then we can finally be done with this. One more night of pretending. Maya set the phone down on the edge of the tub. She pressed her palms against her eyes and sat in the darkness behind her own hands and let the full weight of what she'd just read settle into her bones. 5 years. 5 years of her life. 5 years of shrinking and smiling and performing and trying and hoping and believing that if she just loved him hard enough, he would eventually love her back. And the whole time, he was planning his exit, waiting for the right moment, coordinating with Victoria, treating Maya like a temporary inconvenience that would be soon resolved. He should have cried. A different woman would have cried, but Maya was beyond tears. She was in that cold, clear space where emotions stop mattering and strategy takes over. The same space she'd entered as a child, sitting at a kitchen table waiting for a father who was never coming back. The survival space, the planning space, the part of her brain that didn't care about feelings because feelings were a luxury, and right now she needed to focus on the math. The prenup, that was what Richard was counting on. The document his lawyers had drafted before the wedding. The document that said if the marriage ended, Maya would receive a fixed settlement based on the length of the marriage. 5 years meant approximately $200,000, a fortune by Baltimore standards, a rounding error by Kensington standards. Richard thought that was all she would leave with, $200,000 and whatever personal items she could carry. Not enough to matter. Not enough to threaten his lifestyle, or his reputation, or his precious family legacy. But Richard didn't know about the $4.2 million Maya had built on her own. He didn't know about the investment portfolio she'd been growing for 4 years, the tech startup that just gone public and multiplied her initial investment by 12, the real estate holdings in her maiden name that generated passive income every month, the checking account and brokerage account and retirement account that existed entirely outside of his knowledge. Maya had done what her mother always told her to do. She'd built options. She'd created independence. She'd made sure that when this moment came, and she always knew this moment would come, she would not be at anyone's mercy. The prenup protected Richard's premarital assets, but everything Maya built during the marriage was legally hers. She'd been careful. She'd consulted lawyers without Richard knowing. She'd structured everything properly. Every investment was documented. Every transaction was clean. If Richard's lawyers tried to claim any of it, she had 5 years of records proving that she'd built it herself, with money she'd saved herself from accounts that had nothing to do with the Kensington fortune. Richard thought he was the wealthy one. Richard thought he held all the cards. Richard thought he could trade Maya in for a new model and walk away without consequences. Richard was about to learn that some lessons cost more than money, and Maya was about to prove that she was the most expensive thing he ever lost. The sun came up eventually. Richard woke up, kissed her cheek, told her today was going to be perfect. He had no idea she'd spent the night reading his betrayal word by word. He had no idea that she'd memorized every message. He had no idea that the woman lying next to him wasn't his wife anymore. She was his reckoning, and by midnight, everyone would know it.
The party started at 7. By 7:30, the house was full. 200 guests flowing through rooms that Maya had never felt comfortable in, now filled with people who had never made her feel welcome. The champagne was Dom Perignon. The hors d'oeuvres were prepared by a chef who'd been flown in from New York specifically for this event. The string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand hall. Everything was exactly as Richard had planned. Perfect. Elegant. A monument to wealth and taste and all the things that money could buy. Maya moved through the crowd like a woman sleepwalking through her own funeral. She smiled when people approached her, accepted compliments on her dress with gracious nods, thanked guests for coming, played the role of happy wife so convincingly that even she almost believed it. Almost. The dress she wore was the most expensive thing she'd ever put on her body, a custom Valentino gown in deep emerald green that Richard's stylist had selected. The diamonds around her neck were a gift from their 3rd anniversary. The shoes were Louboutin. The earrings were vintage Cartier. Every piece of her appearance had been curated by someone else, approved by someone else, designed to make her look like she belonged in this world, even though everyone in this room knew she didn't. But tonight, Maya wasn't thinking about belonging. Tonight, she was thinking about leaving, and she was going to do it in a way that none of them would ever forget. She kept her eyes on the door, waiting, watching, knowing that Victoria would arrive eventually and wanting to see it happen, wanting to watch Richard's face when the woman he actually wanted walked into the party celebrating the woman he settled for. Victoria arrived at 8:15. Maya was standing near the bar when she saw her walk in. Blonde hair swept up in an elegant twist, a cream-colored dress that probably cost as much as a car, moving through the entrance with the effortless confidence of a woman who had never doubted her place in any room she entered. Maya watched Victoria scan the crowd, watched her eyes find Richard across the room, watched something pass between them, a look, a recognition, a silent communication that said, "Finally." Richard crossed the room to greet Victoria. Maya watched from a distance, watched him embrace Victoria with a hug that lasted 3 seconds too long, watched his hand rest on the small of her back, watched Victoria lean in and whisper something that made Richard laugh in a way Maya hadn't heard in years. The kind of laugh that comes from genuine joy, the kind she used to hear when they were dating. Before the marriage, before the disappointment, before Richard realized that marrying someone to prove a point wasn't the same as marrying someone you loved. Eleanor appeared beside Victoria like she'd been summoned by a spell. Richard's mother took Victoria's hands in her own and kissed both her cheeks and said something that made Victoria blush and smile. Maya was too far away to hear the words, but she could imagine them. "So good to see you, dear. It's been too long. You look absolutely beautiful." The same woman who had never once complimented Maya on anything, the same woman who looked at her own daughter-in-law like something unpleasant needed to be tolerated.
Eleanor was beaming at Victoria like a proud mother welcoming home a wayward child. Maya watched all of it, cataloging every detail, every gesture, every silent confirmation of everything she'd read in those text messages last night. This wasn't a party. This was a coronation. Victoria's return to the throne she never should have left. And Maya was supposed to stand here smiling while her replacement was celebrated right in front of her. Not tonight. Maya excused herself from a conversation with one of Richard's business partners and walked to the bathroom. Not the guest bathroom, the master bathroom on the second floor, the same bathroom where she'd read those messages 8 hours ago. She locked the door behind her and stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself. The woman staring back at her was beautiful. She could admit that objectively. 5 years of access to the best stylists and spas and dermatologists had polished her into something sleek and refined. But underneath the polish, she could still see the girl from Baltimore, the girl who ate cereal for dinner 3 nights a week, the girl who watched her father walk out and never cried because crying didn't bring people back. The girl who swore she would never depend on anyone. That girl was still in there, buried under layers of silk and diamonds and compromise, but not dead, never dead. Maya reached up and touched the diamonds around her neck. Richard's gift, Richard's property, a beautiful chain designed to remind her who she belonged to. She unclasped the necklace, set it on the counter, looked at herself without it. Better. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, opened the email she'd sent herself last night, the screenshots, the evidence, the receipts of Richard's betrayal laid out in black and white. She scrolled through them one more time, confirming, preparing, making sure the weapon was loaded. Then she opened another app, her investment portfolio, $4.2 million, right there on the screen, built with her own intelligence, her own work, her own refusal to be what everyone assumed she was. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and asked herself one final question. Are you ready? The answer came immediately, from somewhere deep in her chest, from the part of her that had been waiting for this moment since she was 7 years old. Yes. She unlocked the bathroom door, walked down the hallway, descended the grand staircase, and re-entered the party. It was almost 9 o'clock, the perfect time. Guests had been drinking for 2 hours, inhibitions were lowered, attention spans were primed for entertainment. Richard would be giving his speech soon, the speech he'd been practicing all week, the speech about love and partnership and how lucky he was to have Maya. The speech she was about to render meaningless. Maya positioned herself near the main hall, close enough to the front to be visible, close enough to Richard to watch his face change in real time. I saw him glance at his watch, saw him move towards the small stage where the microphone waited, saw him signal to the string quartet to stop playing. The room quieted. 200 faces turned towards Richard. Maya watched Victoria position herself near the front of the crowd, close, but not too close, the kind of distance that said, "We're just friends," while her eyes said something else entirely. Richard picked up the microphone, tapped it twice. The sound echoed through the hall. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate something truly special. 5 years ago, I married this incredible woman, and I've never looked back. He smiled at Maya, that practiced smile, that performance smile, the one he used for clients and cameras and moments that required manufactured warmth. Maya has been my partner, my supporter, my rock. Through every challenge and every triumph, she's been there, and I am so grateful to have her by my side. The crowd applauded politely. Maya watched their faces, the fake smiles, the social obligation clapping. Nobody in this room believed Richard's words any more than she did. They were all just playing their parts in the same elaborate performance. Richard continued talking. More words about love, more words about partnership, more beautiful lies wrapped in expensive vocabulary. Maya let him talk, let him dig himself deeper, let him build the stage she was about to set on fire. When he finished, the crowd applauded again. Richard raised his glass in a toast. 200 glasses raised in response. Everyone drank to a marriage that was already dead. Richard set his glass down and turned to Maya. "Sweetheart, do you want to say a few words?" This was the moment. Maya smiled, walked toward the stage, took the microphone from Richard's hand. Their fingers touched briefly, and she felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. 5 years of marriage, and she felt more connection to the microphone than the man who had just handed it to her. She turned to face the crowd. 200 faces staring at her, waiting, expecting the usual gracious wife speech, the thank you for coming, the I'm so blessed, the performance of gratitude that women like her were supposed to deliver. Maya had a different speech in mind. Thank you all for being here tonight. Her voice was steady, calm, the voice she used in boardrooms years ago when she needed men to listen and take her seriously. Richard and I have been married for 5 years, and in those 5 years, I've learned a lot about value, about what's real and what's performance, about what money can buy and what it can never purchase. The room was silent. Maya could feel the energy shifting. This wasn't the speech they expected. The smiles were starting to falter. People were glancing at each other. Something was wrong, and everyone could sense it. Maya looked directly at Eleanor, Richard's mother, the woman who had spent 5 years making Maya feel like a stain on the family name. I came into this marriage with nothing. At least, that's what everyone assumed. The girl from Baltimore who got lucky, the charity pace who should be grateful. I've heard the whispers. I've seen the looks. I know exactly what you all thought I was. Eleanor's face hardened. Richard took a step towards Maya like he wanted to grab the microphone, but something in her eyes stopped him. A warning. A line he understood he should not cross. But here's what none of you knew, Maya continued. While you were all busy deciding I wasn't worth your respect, I was building something of my own. Quietly, independently, not because I didn't trust my husband. She paused, looked at Richard, let the moment stretch. Although maybe I should have trusted him less. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were looking at each other, now looking at Richard, now looking at Victoria, who was standing near the front with an expression that was trying very hard to stay neutral and failing. You see, the thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to work. Nobody watches the woman they've already dismissed. Nobody pays attention to the charity case. While all of you were busy looking down on me, I was looking ahead. I was investing. I was building. I was creating something that had nothing to do with Richard's money or Richard's name or Richard's world. Maya pulled out her phone, tapped the screen. The large display screen behind her flickered to life. Richard had installed it for presentations at corporate events he hosted at the house. Tonight, it was going to serve a different purpose. Her investment portfolio appeared on the screen. The number was clearly visible, $4.2 million, built entirely in her name, documented and legal, and absolutely untouchable by Richard's lawyers. The crowd gasped, actually gasped. 200 wealthy people who thought they had Maya figured out, staring at a number that didn't fit their narrative. Maya watched their faces change. Confusion, disbelief, the slow dawning recognition that they had been wrong about her, that they had all been so incredibly wrong. "I'm not the gold digger you assumed I was," Maya said, her voice still calm, still controlled, still refusing to give them the emotional breakdown they probably expected. She turned to Richard, looked directly into his eyes, saw the panic there, the calculations happening behind his expression, the desperate search for a way to spin this, to minimize it, to make her the villain somehow. "But I was wrong about that too, Richard, because I found your messages with Victoria. I know about the divorce you're planning. I know you invited her here tonight to prepare everyone for what's coming. And I know you thought the prenup would protect you, that I would leave with nothing, that I would disappear quietly while you went back to the woman everyone always assumed you should have married in the first place." The room had gone completely silent. Nobody was drinking, nobody was whispering. 200 people frozen in place, watching a marriage publicly detonate in front of them.
Victoria's face had gone pale. She was backing away from the front of the crowd, trying to disappear, trying to escape the spotlight that Maya had just shoved her into. Here's the thing about prenups, Richard. They protect assets that existed before the marriage, but everything I built during our marriage. With my own intelligence, my own work, my own money from accounts you never knew existed. Your lawyers can't touch it, and neither can you. She set the microphone down on the edge of the stage, reached up and removed her wedding ring, the 5-carat diamond Richard had presented her with at their engagement party, while everyone applauded and Eleanor quietly seethed. Maya held it up so the crowd could see it, let the light catch it one final time. Then she set it down on the stage next to the microphone. "Victoria," Maya called out, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "He's all yours. Good luck. You're going to need it." Maya stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted for her like water. Nobody tried to stop her. Nobody said a word. They just watched, stunned, speechless, witnessing something that none of them had ever seen before. She was halfway to the door when Richard found his voice. "Maya, wait! Please, we can talk about this. You're making a mistake." Maya stopped, turned around and looked at the man she had loved for 5 years, the man she had shrunk herself for, performed for, tried so desperately to be enough for. She smiled, a real smile, the first one she'd worn in this house in years. "No, Richard, the mistake was yours. You thought I was your trophy. Turns out, I was the whole championship, and you just forfeited." She paused, let the words land. Then she added the part she'd been rehearsing in her head all day, the final line, the closing argument of a case she'd been building since she was 7 years old. "You want to know what's priceless, Richard? It's not your money. It's not your family name. It's not your mother's approval or Victoria's attention or any of the things you think give you value." She gestured around the room, at the crystal chandeliers and the designer gowns, and the champagne that cost more per bottle than her mother made in a week. Priceless is knowing your worth, really knowing it, in your bones, in your soul, knowing that you are valuable not because of who chooses you, but because of who you are. You never understood that. You never will. And that's why no matter how much money you have, you'll always be poor in the ways that actually matter. She turned and walked toward the door, each step echoing in the massive hall. 200 people watching her leave, Richard trying to salvage his reputation, Victoria trying to pretend she'd just been publicly identified as the other woman, Eleanor probably already calling lawyers. None of it mattered. Maya reached the front door, paused with her hand on the handle, took one final breath of the air inside this house she never belonged in and never wanted to. Then she opened the door, stepped out into the night, and closed it behind her without looking back. The October air was cool on her face. The stars were out. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked and a dog barked, and the city hummed with the ordinary sounds of ordinary people living ordinary lives. Maya stood on the front steps of the mansion for a moment, letting it sink in, the enormity of what she'd just done, the bridge she'd just burned, the life she'd just walked away from. She felt light, lighter than she'd felt in years, maybe ever, like she'd been carrying a weight so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, a text from the car service she'd booked that morning. The driver was waiting at the end of the driveway, ready to take her wherever she wanted to go. Maya smiled, walked down the steps, started down the long driveway toward the car that was going to carry her away from this place forever. Behind her, the mansion glowed with light. 200 guests trying to process what they'd just witnessed, Richard trying to salvage his reputation, Victoria trying to pretend she'd just been publicly identified as the other woman, Eleanor probably already calling lawyers. None of it mattered. Maya reached the car. The driver opened the door for her. She slid into the back seat. Leather. Warm. Anonymous. The driver got in, turned to look at her through the rear-view mirror. "Where to, ma'am?" Maya thought about it. Where did she want to go? She had $4.2 million. She had no obligations, no husband waiting, no in-laws judging, no performance to maintain. She could go anywhere. But there was only one place she wanted to be right now. "Baltimore," she said. "Take me home." The driver nodded, put the car in gear, and drove away from the mansion. Maya didn't look back. She never would.
The drive to Baltimore took 3.5 hours. Maya spent most of it staring out the window, watching the scenery change from manicured suburbs to highway to the familiar landscapes of her childhood. The lights of the city appeared on the horizon around midnight, yellow and white and scattered like stars that had fallen from the sky and decided to stay on the ground. She didn't call ahead, didn't warn anyone she was coming. She just showed up at her mother's door at 12:30 in the morning, still wearing the Valentino gown and the Louboutin heels and the Cartier earrings, still dressed like a woman who belonged in a mansion, standing on the porch of a row house in East Baltimore, where the steps creaked and the railing wobbled and the doorbell hadn't worked in 15 years. She knocked. It took a few minutes. She heard movement inside. Footsteps, the shuffle of slippers on hardwood floors, the chain sliding, the deadbolt turning. And then the door opened, and Gloria was standing there in a robe with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression of pure confusion on her face. "Maya? Baby, what are you doing here? It's the middle of the night. Is everything okay? Where's Richard?" Maya opened her mouth, and that's when it hit her. All of it. Everything she'd been holding back. Everything she'd suppressed to get through the last 24 hours. The messages, the betrayal, the speech, the walk out the door. The weight of 5 years of pretending finally lifted. It all came crashing down at once. And Maya, who had not cried in longer than she could remember, burst into tears on her mother's doorstep like a child who had finally found her way home after being lost for a very long time. Gloria didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just opened her arms and pulled her daughter inside and held her the way she used to hold her when Maya was small and the world was scary and the only safe place was pressed against her mother's chest, listening to her heartbeat. They stood in the narrow hallway of Gloria's row house for a long time. Maya crying, Gloria holding, neither of them speaking. Because some moments are too big for words. Some pain is too heavy for language to carry. Sometimes all you can do is hold on and let the storm pass through. Eventually, Maya's tears slowed. Her breathing steadied. She pulled back and looked at her mother's face. Her eyes were wet too. But she was smiling. That particular smile she had always reserved for moments when Maya exceeded expectations. Pride and love and something else. Something that looked almost like relief. "Come on, baby," Gloria said. "Let me make you some tea. And then you're going to tell me everything." They sat at Gloria's kitchen table. The same table where Maya used to do her homework. The same table where she'd ate cereal for dinner on nights when money was tight. The same table where she'd planned her escape from this neighborhood, never imagining that one day she'd be planning her return. Gloria made tea. Chamomile, Maya's favorite since childhood. She set the cup down before her daughter and sat across from her and waited, patient, unhurried, the way Gloria had always been, a woman who understood that some stories need time to find their way out. Maya told her everything. She started at the beginning. The first year of marriage, when things seemed good, the slow erosion, the photograph of Victoria, the whispers from Eleanor, the late-night phone calls, the growing distance, the secret portfolio she'd been building for 4 years, the discovery of the guest list, the confrontation with Richard, the messages she found the night before the party, and finally, the speech, the revelation, the ring on the stage, the walk out the door. Gloria listened without interrupting. Her face moved through expressions as Maya talked. Anger when Maya described the messages. Sorrow when Maya talked about the years of feeling invisible. Pride when Maya revealed the $4.2 million she'd built on her own. And something that looked like vindication when Maya described standing in front of 200 people and proving every single one of them wrong. When Maya finished talking, the tea had gone cold in her cup. The clock on the wall showed 2:47 in the morning. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of old pipes and the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. Gloria reached across the table and took Maya's hands in hers. Her palms were rough from decades of work, calloused and lined and strong. The hands of a woman who had never stopped fighting, who had raised a daughter alone and watched that daughter climb higher than she ever imagined. "Baby," Gloria said softly, "I need to tell you something." Maya looked at her mother, waited. "I spent so many years worrying about you. When you married Richard, when you moved into that big house with those people who looked at you like you didn't belong, I was so scared you were going to lose yourself, trying to be what they wanted you to be." She squeezed Maya's hands tighter. "But I should have known better. I should have trusted what I raised. Because you're not a woman who disappears. You're not a woman who shrinks. You're not a woman who lets anybody tell you what you're worth." Gloria's eyes were wet again. Her voice cracked slightly. "You're my daughter, baby. And tonight you proved something that I always knew, but you needed to learn for yourself. You don't need anybody's permission to be valuable. You don't need anybody's validation. You don't need a man or a mansion or a last name that opens doors. You just need to know who you are. And baby, you finally know." Maya felt fresh tears sliding down her cheeks, but these tears were different. Not grief, not exhaustion, something lighter, something that felt almost like freedom. She stood up and walked around the table and hugged her mother the way she used to hug her when she was small, before Jerome left, before poverty made everything hard, before the world taught her that love was conditional and safety was temporary. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered, "for everything, for working those jobs, for pushing me to be better, for never letting me forget that I was worth more than what anyone else thought of me." Gloria held her daughter tight. "That's what mothers do, baby. We plant seeds and pray for rain, and sometimes we get to watch the garden grow." Maya stayed in Baltimore for 3 weeks. She slept in her childhood bedroom. The walls still had tape marks from the posters she'd hung in high school. The closet still had boxes of old textbooks and yearbooks and mementos from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She rediscovered pieces of herself she'd forgotten existed. The girl who used to dream about escaping, the teenager who worked 2 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, the woman who clawed her way into finance before Richard ever appeared in her life. She wasn't running away. She was running back to the person she was before she started trying to be someone else's idea of who she should be. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Richard's lawyers tried to fight for a portion of her portfolio. They failed. Every investment Maya made was documented and legal and entirely separate from any Kensington assets. Angela Chen, the lawyer Derek's cousin had recommended, destroyed them in mediation. Richard ended up paying Maya's legal fees on top of the prenup settlement. The final number was almost poetic. Richard lost more money fighting Maya than he would have lost just letting her go. She heard through mutual acquaintances that Victoria moved into the mansion within weeks of the divorce being finalized, that Eleanor was thrilled, that Richard and Victoria were engaged by the following spring. Maya felt nothing when she heard the news. Not anger, not jealousy, not even satisfaction. Just a quiet detachment from a story that no longer included her. Let them have each other. Let them have the mansion and the champagne and the string quartets and the dinner parties where everyone performed wealth for everyone else. Let Victoria deal with Eleanor's expectations and Richard's distraction and the slow, suffocating realization that money doesn't fix whatever is broken inside a person. It just gives them more expensive ways to avoid looking at it. Maya moved back to Baltimore permanently, not to her mother's row house, but close by. She bought a brownstone in a neighborhood that was gentrifying slowly. 3 stories, original hardwood floors, a backyard with a tree that reminded her of the one outside her childhood window. She renovated it herself, not because she couldn't afford contractors, but because she wanted to build something with her own hands, wanted to feel the physical reality of creating a home instead of just purchasing one. She started a foundation, financial literacy for young Black women, teaching them the things she wished someone had taught her: how to budget, how to invest, how to build credit and leverage assets, and create wealth instead of just chasing it, how to know their worth before anyone else had a chance to undervalue them. The foundation was called the Carter Initiative. Not Kensington. Never Kensington. She'd legally changed her name back 6 months after the divorce. Maya Denise Carter, the name her mother gave her, the name she should have kept all along. Gloria came to the opening of the foundation's first office. She was 73 years old now, retired finally, after Maya insisted and offered to cover any expenses Gloria needed. She walked through the building slowly,